June 1941, there has been a recent discovery of thousands of Polish officers found in mass graves. The graves were found by the Nazis. The Nazis have claimed that Stalin and the Soviet Union were responsible for this massacre. Stalin has vigorously denied this and blamed the Nazis. As of yet, the Allies have accepted the views of the Soviet Union. Over 20,000 bodies have been found, and it is suspected that this is the only part of the death toll. The information is all second-hand. The Nazis claimed that Stalin himself signed the order for this massacre. Apparently, the bodies were discovered while a railroad was under construction. The Nazis are using the massacre as anti-communist propaganda. This makes their claim seem dubious, considering the way that they lied about the deaths of the Polish officers to instigate the war. The issue is currently shrouded by war and cannot be fully investigated until a later date. Until then, we can only hope that no more such graves are discovered.
In July of 1944, the Red Army broke through the Polish border and began fighting its way through Poland towards Warsaw. Hoping to get assistance from the Russians, the Polish army decided it was time to launch an offensive against the occupying German troops. The order was officially given on the 1st of August by General Bor Komorowski. The Polish army consisted of approximately 40,000 soldiers, 10% of whom were women. They were badly underarmed and only had enough weapons for about 2,500 soldiers. In other words, not even enough for just the women. The German army, though only 75% the size, was much better armed, utilizing tanks, planes, and artillery, in addition to having arms for every soldier. In the first few days, the Polish army won numerous skirmishes. However, their plan only required them to last until the Red Army arrived to help. It would have succeeded had Stalin not stopped the Soviet advance upon learning of the uprising. Meanwhile, Himmler ordered the German army to utterly destroy the entire city and its inhabitants. The Red Army essentially sat idly by, watching the uprising and the city be crushed by the Germans. The reason for this was Stalin's ultimate plan was to take control of Poland and make it part of the Soviet Union, which would be much easier to do with the capital destroyed. Without Soviet help, the Polish army was forced to drag out an operation that was supposed to last only a couple of days into a long-term conflict. On August 5th, in the borough of Wola, the Germans publicly executed approximately 65,000 Polish civilians in an effort to crush the morale of the resistance. The Poles kept fighting, but when Germans began using Polish women as human shields, the morale of the insurgents dropped sharply. Eventually, they were forced to retreat into hiding and start utilizing guerrilla tactics. With dwindling food and ammunition, it became clear that the Polish army would have to capitulate, which it did on October 2nd, after 30,000 military casualties and 250,000 civilian deaths. Immediately after the capitulation, the Germans began burning what was left of the city to the ground. When the Russians finally liberated it, they found only ruins.
The Siege of Leningrad began on September 8, 1941, and lasted until the 27th of January, 1944. The Germans surrounded the city and cut it off from all outside aid. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and hundreds of thousands of Russian civilians starved to death or were killed. After almost 3 years of fighting, Leningrad was finally liberated and the Soviets claimed victory there. The Germans targeted Leningrad for its symbolic importance as the capital of the Russian Revolution. They believed it would be a huge victory that would crush the morale of the Soviets. Their primary goal was to take the city and move on. However, they were ordered directly by Hitler to lay siege to the city. He wanted to starve them into submission. German troops, allied with the Finnish, completely encompassed the city, effectively cutting off all food and supplies from its inhabitants. By February 1942, 200,000 Russians had died from starvation, illness, or German bombs bombarding the city. Reports of cannibalism from within the city began to emerge. 2 months later, the Soviets opened up a railway link into northern Russia. From this point on, the real resistance to the siege began. Come August, the Russians were able to make real offensives against the German and Finnish blockades. The fighting that ensued resulted in several failed attempts by the Soviets to free themselves. This trend continued until the 12th of January, 1944, when the Soviets launched Operation Spark. Just weeks after, the Germans retreated from the city and Leningrad was freed. The 900-day siege killed more than 2 million Russian soldiers and over 600,000 civilians. The casualties of the Germans were far fewer in number.
Even prior to our victory in Europe, there has been much talk of executing many Axis leaders as war criminals. Throughout this war, the Axis powers have shown an unmatched level of brutality because their leaders enforced doctrines of violence, terror, and virulent racism. Through the duration of this war, millions of people, especially those of minorities, such as the Jewish people, were raped, killed, humiliated, and used for slave labor, showing the downright lack of humanity that the Axis leaders were capable of. In this war, the worst war crimes were most certainly not the breaking of treaties prior to the war. Much has been undertaken to ensure that these trials took place in some form, beginning before the Allied victory. Many different ideas have been brought forth, including some relatively extreme ones. Uncle Joe, for example, put forth the proposition that at least 50,000 German officers be executed during the Terran Conference, an idea that Winston Churchill opposed by denouncing the cold-blooded executions of soldiers that fought for their country. In the end, however, a solution was decided upon. It was decided that the leading potential war criminals of the Axis powers be tried by judges and prosecutors of France, England, Russia, and the United States in Nuremberg, Germany, a former site of many Nazi rallies. Note that many of the most notorious Axis leaders, including Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels, had already committed suicide. During the main trial, 24 people were tried, and 12 people were sentenced to death. During previous other trials held by the United States, almost 200 Nazis were tried, and 142 were found guilty, leading to several death sentences and quite a few life sentences. While this may not seem like sufficient punishment for the enactors of atrocities such as the Holocaust, it has been decided that most Germans taking part were focused primarily on fighting for their country and that their decisions were a result more of the propaganda that they faced constantly, as opposed to their actual characters.
Both Australia and Canada have been unsung heroes of this war, yet both have played major parts in the war effort. Australia has fought well in the Pacific theater. They began, however, by fighting in Africa, Crete, and throughout Europe. Then, under the perceived threat of invasion from the Japanese, the majority of their forces returned to Australia and the Pacific theater. They fought several successful but bloody campaigns in places like Borneo to drive out the Japanese. Canada fought in Europe, notably in Italy, where they proved their competence and valor. They also fought Germany in the North Atlantic. Though their military was very brave and important, even more important was their merchant fleet, which helped to supply Britain and the other allies during the fight with Germany. Finally, both countries have sent their brave boys off to fight the Axis through other countries' militaries. Both countries have been key to success in war, and their contributions will not go unnoticed.
This is Ian West,
Jared Pratt,
Chris Rose,
and Phil Menard. Thank you for tuning into Radio Phil this week for your updates on the war.